just stop to think about the silent, invisible war that's being fought inside your body every single second of every day? It's this constant tug of war for balance, a delicate dance that keeps everything, from your blood to your brain cells, working just perfectly. So in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden forces that make this perfect equilibrium possible. So really, how does our body manage this incredible feat? I mean, how does it keep trillions of individual cells perfectly happy? Well, the answer lies in a microscopic world filled with particles, pressures, and passages. To really understand this balancing act, we first need to meet the main players, all these tiny particles swimming around in our body's fluids. So let's get to know our cast of characters. First up, we've got electrolytes. Now, these are the nimble players in the game. Just think about what happens when you dissolve plain old table salt, that's sodium chloride, in water. It doesn't just sit there, right? It breaks apart into these tiny charged ions. And because they're so small, they can easily slip right through the cell's security gates, what we call semi-permeable membranes. Next are the crystalloids. Now, unlike electrolytes, substances like urea don't break apart into ions. They stay whole. They're still pretty small, but they're a little bit pickier about which cellular doors they'll pass through. For them, getting through isn't always a guarantee. And finally, we have the heavyweights, the colloids. These are large, kind of glue-like substances, like proteins and starch. You can think of them as the giants in this microscopic world. They are simply too big to get through the cell's security, so they just stay put. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of the key differences here. Electrolytes are small. They split up, and they can pass through membranes freely. Crystalloids are also small, but they don't split, so their passage is kinda iffy. And then colloids are the giants that are always denied entry. This fundamental difference, who gets to move and who has to stay, is the absolute key to our body's entire balancing act. Now that we've met all the particles, let's take a look at the environment they live in, the solutions in our body, and what happens when our cells actually encounter them. This is where the balancing act becomes a matter of life and death for our cells. Seriously. In an isotonic solution, the fluid concentration is just right so the cell is stable and happy. But if you put it in a hypotonic or less concentrated solution, water just floods in, causing the cell to swell up and even burst. In a hypertonic solution, the total opposite happens. Water gets sucked out and the cell just shrivels up. You see, it's all about that perfect balance. And this has some really critical real-world importance. Ever wonder why hospital IV drips use something called normal saline? Well, it's a 0.9% sodium chloride solution, and that makes it perfectly isotonic with our red blood cells. This ensures they don't swell up or shrink down when the fluid is introduced into your system. It's biophysics in action, literally saving lives. So what is this invisible force that's pushing and pulling water across membranes, making cells swell or shrink? The answer is a fundamental process that governs pretty much all of life. It's called osmosis. At its core, osmosis is actually pretty simple. Water, which is the universal solvent in our bodies, has a natural tendency to move around. It flows from an area where there's more water and fewer other particles, a dilute solution, to an area where there's less water and more particles, a more concentrated solution. Let's break that down. Imagine a cell membrane separating two different fluids. The water molecules can pass right through, but the other stuff, the solutes, they can't. So if one side is saltier or more concentrated, water will naturally flow towards that saltier side to try and even things out. And it'll keep moving until the concentration on both sides of the membrane is perfectly balanced. Nature is always seeking equilibrium. Here's another great way to picture it. The more concentrated solution basically has a pull or a suck on the water. It's actively drawing water towards itself to try and find balance. And that pull is exactly what we call osmotic pressure. So how does the body use this force to its advantage? Well, let's look at one of the most critical examples, just keeping water inside of our blood vessels. Hey, remember those big colloids, the proteins that can't leave the blood vessels? Well, this is where they have their starring role. The osmotic pressure they create is so important it gets its own special name, oncotic pressure, and it acts just like a powerful magnet for water, holding it inside the bloodstream. And this isn't just some vague concept, it's a measurable force. The normal oncotic pressure in our plasma is between 25 and 30 millimeters of mercury. This specific pressure is the main force that's keeping the liquid part of our blood right where it belongs. So what happens when this pressure drops?
Well, in conditions like liver or kidney failure, the body can't produce enough of those proteins, so that water magnet we just talked about gets a lot weaker. As a result, water starts to leak out of the blood vessels and pools in the surrounding tissues, and that causes the visible swelling we know as edema. It's a direct physical sign that this invisible balancing act is failing.
We've seen how balance is maintained in our blood. So now let's zoom in even further, all the way down to the level of a single cell. How do they control what gets in and what gets out? To control their internal world, cells use two main strategies. The first is passive transport. You can think of this as the easy way. It's like floating downhill with a natural flow, no energy required. Then there's active transport, and that's the hard way. This means forcing substances uphill against their natural flow, and that requires a ton of cellular energy. One really fascinating type of passive transport is called facilitated diffusion. There's this fantastic ferry boat analogy for it. A special carrier protein grabs a substance on one side of the membrane, shuttles it across, and then drops it off on the other side before going back for more. It's still going downhill, but it needs a little helper to get across. And then on the other side, you have active transport. The classic example is the sodium pump. Imagine a room that's already super crowded, and you're spending a bunch of energy to push more people into it. That's what your cells do with sodium. They burn energy to constantly pump it out, even though the concentration outside is already high. This constant uphill battle is absolutely crucial for everything from sending a nerve impulse to contracting a muscle. So, from the proteins holding water in your blood to the tiny little ferry boats servicing your cells, this whole invisible balancing act is happening everywhere, all the time. It kind of makes you wonder, what other incredible unseen systems are working away right now just to keep you going?